So first, let's hear what Elon has to say.
Um, I think I think most likely the form of government on Mars would be somewhat of a direct democracy, where you vote on issues, where people vote directly on issues, instead of going through representative government. In
Let's take a simple example. Let's say that we have a Mars colony with 25 colonists, and they are going to use a direct democracy. Now, for each colonist to make a responsible decision, they need to use the equivalent of $15 worth of time. So 25 times 15 is $375. So a single decision requiring a vote on Mars requires $375 worth of time. So it has a cost to the colonist of $375. Now let's say that we use a representative democracy instead. So now we just have 3 individuals in the Mars colony who have been elected to make decisions for the other colonists. So now the cost of making a decision is 3 times 15, which is $45. So we can see that a decision made with direct democracy has a cost of over 830% more than a limited representative democracy. Let's look at a real example. The United States has over 500,000 elected officials, and the population is over 320 million people, which means if we were to convert the United States to a direct democracy, the increase in decision cost would be over 62,000%. Now, this example ignores many factors like voter eligibility or the number of assistants which each elected representative uses to process information and gather information and make decisions. But it illustrates the point. There is a huge increase in the cost of making decisions to the society with a direct democracy versus a limited representative democracy. There is another issue. In a normally distributed body of voters who on average can cast responsible votes, there will still be at least 15% of people who cannot make and will not make responsible decisions. What this means is that 15% of voters who are easily influenced or who are making decisions based on criteria that are not relevant to the issues at hand can be used as a weapon against everybody else to unfairly win or influence decision making. So we can see this fact illustrated pretty clearly with presidential elections in this country, in the United States. The result is elections boil down to who can influence the largest percentage of that 15% of easily influenceable voters. This phenomenon is known as mob rule in a democracy. In this country, we have developed the concept of an electoral college to avoid some of the pitfalls associated with popular voting. So the solution to the dangers of mob rule or a direct democracy again has been alleviated in this country by using a representative system, in this case the electoral college. And there are probably other solutions, but they will all boil down to a similar approach, somehow using a representative system to optimize the amount of resources and optimize the accuracy and quality of decisions that are being made. So let's compare and contrast direct versus representative democracy. In a direct democracy, decision making is very expensive because each individual must be familiar with and take time to understand the issues in order to make responsible votes. A direct democracy is also susceptible to corruption in the sense that at least 15% of the voting population will be weaponizable against the rest of the populace. Decision making in a direct democracy is also very slow because each individual must take the time to understand the issues and then take time to vote. Now let's contrast that to a representative democracy. In a representative democracy, decision making is relatively fast and it's relatively cheap because only a very small subset of the population is required to understand the issues and complete their voting tasks. The decisions tend to be reasonable because of the nature of an elected representative, and the corruption, while it's still a problem with the representative democracy, it's still a vulnerability. It's much easier to oversee and regulate the behavior of a small subset of the population than it is to regulate and oversee the behavior of an entire population. Even in our example of 25 Mars colonists, imagine 25 Mars colonists trying to regulate the behavior of each individual trying to regulate the behavior of the other 24 to ensure that there is no corruption, versus, say, having a subset of 3 individuals who are responsible for making decisions being regulated by the other 22. So to summarize, a representative democracy is significantly more efficient, and it's significantly easier to regulate and oversee than a direct democracy. All forms of government can be viewed as a representative democracy, in the sense that all governments exist on a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum is a dictator, where a single individual represents the entire population and makes decisions for the entire population. And at the other end of the spectrum, each individual represents the population and contributes to the decision making for the population. Healthy civilizations exist somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. They're not dictatorships, but they're also not mob rule. If you were to model the cost of decision making, the dictator would approach 0 in this graph, and the direct democracy would approach infinity. The type of leadership used by a society is a function of the resources available to make decisions. In the case of resource-constrained environments like a spacecraft or a ship at sea or a military battalion on a battlefield, a dictatorship style of leadership is used because there are not enough resources to involve everyone in the decision-making process. Because the cost of decision-making is a function of the degree of representation, practical forms of government will never progress beyond a limited representative democracy. In summary, Elon Musk is wrong to state that future forms of government will converge on direct democracy because of the resource allocation problems and the issues with 15% of the population, voting population, being unavoidably weaponizable against the rest of the populace. But I'm kind of a dumb individual. I don't have a fancy college degree or a career in politics. Maybe I'm naive or just ignorant. I would love to hear what you have to say about this. Leave your comments below and let me know what's on your mind.